Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Patrick K. Porter, Ph.D., is an award-winning author, speaker, and the founder of BrainTap, the leader in technology-enhanced meditation. Dr. Porter pioneered the use of brainwave entrainment to improve clarity, sleep, and energy, and remains at the forefront of scientific research. Well, Dr. Porter, thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I hope you can start us off by telling us a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds great. Well, what happened to me was I was born into a house with a good Irish Catholic family. My father was a chronic alcoholic, and so we were struggling like most kids. I spent my time with Alateen and Al-Anon, seeing my dad go off once a year to rehab centers. And then one day, finally, the church came along. Father Fitzpatrick and Sister Mary said, "Hey, Michael, we're going to teach you how to relax." And my dad went to what was called the Ultra Relaxation Seminar at the church. It was actually, we found out later, it was the Silva method, but he went there and he learned how to relax his body and he stopped drinking. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, he didn't realize he was basically prescribing alcohol as his solution to his stress problems. Once he figured out that he could go to level, is what they called it then, and they were using galvanic skin response system. So that's how I got into machines and meditation and how all that works. Now, back then, of course, this is in the 70s, so there was no, cassettes were just coming out. So what happened to me was my father thought, hey, this is good enough for me. It's good enough for my 9 kids. So he actually went on and took all their training and became the Southwest regional trainer for the Silva method. So I grew up setting up chairs, doing seminars, helping him out. If there wasn't enough people to fill the chairs, then it was the kids. We were all there. I probably did about 300 Silva seminars. But then my dad's voice in my head, all I could hear was 4-letter words, and none of them were love, because I was thinking back to when he was abusive. But he had changed, but he had helped me to create my very first affirmation cassette when they first came out. And I remember waking up, they had an alarm clock that would actually wake you up to your cassette. So I would wake up with this message, because I was a very negative kid. I mean, I was held back in 2nd grade and just trouble everywhere. But as soon as my dad taught me, hey, calm down, let's train you with this GSR machine, which for most people might not know what that is. It's basically galvanic skin response. You put your fingers in it. They still sell them on Amazon, actually, for a couple $100s. You can do a lot of alpha training. So what we did was we started looking at what was my triggers, what was triggering my reactions, because I was letting life kind of control me like a ping pong ball. And I realized that once I started calming down my brain, I was a pretty smart kid. And of course, my mother worked also in the area of nutrition. So she got us off the white flour, the white sugar. Our whole house did a whole makeover. And you probably appreciate this. Some of the younger listeners won't, but in high school, I was tagged in my senior yearbook to replace Ewell Gibbons in the Grape Nuts commercials. So that's because I was the first health food store in the world was in Battle Creek, Michigan. So we grew up with that. And I think my passion comes from, hey, it helped me. Here's this struggling kid that thought the world was against them, to find out, hey, the world is actually conspiring with me if I'm willing to make some changes. If I'm not willing to make changes, then I can't change the world, but I can change myself. And that's been my theme ever since then. And what drives me today is just seeing that how can I help people to disengage their nervous system from this, what we call the survivor brain, to the thriving brain. And that's been my life's work for the last 35 years.
Wonderful. And of course, with the GSR device, it stands for the galvanic skin response. And what I've told people for decades is it was the first commercially available biofeedback device. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, what you've done over the years is blend a lot of different technologies. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was very fortunate in the 80s to partner with a company. There's a whole long story behind that. They can read one of my books to get that. But I became involved with a group called Light and Sound Research. And this happened because we were using sound, and Silva had a sound which now we might call isochronic tones. which is a monaural. It's not binaural, like people hear binaurals all the time, but it's a monaural sound that actually triggers the brain to go into these different states. And now we have technology that can actually record it. Back then, it was almost like voodoo or magic, because we didn't know. We could tell by respiration, hand temperature, all the things you'd look at through biofeedback, but we didn't know exactly what the brain was doing. And then someone came along named Ann Wise, and she wrote the book, The Master Brainwave. And that's when they first came out with EEGs that could read out on LED slides. So it looked like basically you'd see the brain, right side, left side, and you could see if the brain was functioning. And then that equipment was very expensive. Actually you leased it because it was so expensive. Now, of course, we can buy Muse devices, which are $200 and measure brain waves. And what we started to figure out was, hey, through respiration, hand temperature, actually now heart rate variability, but we were looking at how can we change brain states. And it was really, their research was all about pain control. Most people don't realize that pain only happens in one brain frequency, the beta brainwave. If you get somebody out of alpha into alpha and minimize their beta, they'll be in pain-free states. So we were doing this. This was before the opioid, basically revolution, I guess you'd call it, or evolution, however you want to look at it, because people are misusing them. But we wanted to show how could we trigger these morphine receptors in the brain. And we do that through light, sound, and vibration. But at first it was just sound, and sound is very effective. So, there's a lot of really good research out there about sound. But what we found was, and this happened through our research, was that our eyes control 30% of our hearing. Most people don't know that. But I usually use the example, if you've been to a lecture and you couldn't hear the lecture, but as soon as you got line of sight to the lecture, then you could hear them. That's because you activated that, basically the default mode network that says, out of these 25,000 pieces of information that our ears are hearing, I want to listen to that one. So we basically, like any finely tuned radar device or something, our brain tunes into that sound. Also, another example for the listeners is if you and I were sitting around talking at a restaurant, having a great time, and somebody 3 tables over said EMDR, our ears would perk up. We go, oh, wow, there's somebody over there working with somebody with traumatic injuries, right? Or some kind of emotional issue. So we wouldn't hear the rest of the conversation. So this is the basically what we're looking at in the brain. And this happens in the limbic system. So we're looking at, can we change the physiology without the conscious mind being involved? Because our conscious mind sometimes can hijack our health, because it starts thinking about shame, blame, guilt, and all the other negative emotions. And emotions are good. Obviously, that's what makes us humans. But if we're not in control of them, or we don't in the flow with them, they can hijack us. Like we can get one bad text in the morning and then the rest of the day we're disrupted. So what we wanted to show was, hey, how can we use sound first? Then we went to light. Now, this happened because I'm always looking at ancient traditions. I had an experience, which I wrote about in one of my books too, where I actually had I wouldn't call it a near-death experience, but I was well on my way. My body was failing, and I had an spontaneous healing. And nobody could explain it. They kept me in the hospital for 2 months to figure out how they healed me, but they didn't do anything. My body basically healed itself, and through some pretty amazing situations. But then what happened was I started thinking, what just happened to me? How did I go from being this sick person? It was a industrial accident where I had bisulfite poisoning, and into healing my body. And that got me into looking at ancient traditions is what I mean. So I was wondering what happened to me, because I was brought up Catholic. The only thing I knew, if the Pope said it, it was true, if nothing else. And so what happened to me was they just came out with LEDs. So in the 80s, LEDs were very expensive, but they weren't very tuned like they are today. Like people say, oh, I'm using 840 or 830 LEDs or for infrared, or I'm using 470 nanometer light for blue. We didn't know there was just red light. There was just red LEDs. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to find out what would happen with the flickering response. And this came from something called the Jyoti meditation, where when you look at a candle, a lot of people will do this. It's actually a biofeedback technique too, but they don't use it as much as they used to because we have technology now. But you could put a candle out about a foot away from you. And when that candle's flickering, you breathe and you just kind of make the candle flicker. Well, they thought it was because of the breathing, which is part of it. But the reality is the candle light flickers at 10 hertz frequency. Now, the reason that's important is our brain has these little cilia on the brain that are always interpreting the frequencies of the world around us. And if you and I were on a spaceship coming toward Earth, we would see our Earth resonates between 0.01 and 100 hertz frequency. Some people will say up to 400. We've had some Buddhist monks get their brains evaluated, and they've spiked gamma up over 400, which is kind of amazing. Most people will never see more than 60, but they're doing it based on love and gratitude. But what we thought was what was doing it was the brain was seeing the candle flicker, then it was matching that frequency, and the body would go into a state of alpha, because the whole thing back then was all about alpha. Now we know that if we do, for instance, if we go to the mountaintop and we meditate, like people go, why do gurus go to the mountaintop? Well, when you're sitting in a cave, let's say, on a mountain, your body is resonating or tuning to the frequency of the mountain. That mountain has a resonant frequency of 7.8 hertz frequency. So our body basically is vibrating and resonating to it, and then it matches it. And, then of course, if you do breathing techniques with it, that's even better. The problem most people have that we found as we were doing this kind of science was their old thinking kept getting in the way. You can overdrive a lot of good things by negative thoughts, right? If you're the optimistic person can get results in areas where the pessimist can't, because the pessimist closes the door to opportunity, while the optimist opens the door for infinite potentials. So the brain, being basically the most powerful pharmacy on earth, activates these different neurons. And one of the things we're doing right now that we can talk about later maybe is the Brazil study, where the Brazilian government actually, on their own dime, they're spending $250,000 to prove BrainTap is a digital drug, because we proved that we can upregulate 54 different neurotransmitters and downregulate the stress hormones. And they're proving that just through light, sound, and vibration. So when light came along, it changed the game, in that now we knew, instead of just having a maybe 60, 70% opportunity to help people move their brain states with just audio, now we were seeing that as long as there was no organic issues with the brain, that any brain can follow the sequence into theta within 3 sessions. We proved this we did a study with 1,000 people, that non-meditators, and we had them do, it wasn't the BrainTap at the time, because this was years ago, it was one of my earlier pieces, but we showed that the brain of, these were students, we showed that the brain of every student followed the algorithm every time, because basically it's kind of the way our body works. We're not teaching the body to do something new or different. We're just teaching the body to use its natural sync and rhythm to tune the brain up. And that's really where it all started. And then now, because we saw that the words were getting in the way, or maybe their own internal dialogue, we started creating, or I started creating different positive psychology messages, if you will. They have a mix of NLP. I trained with Richard Bandler and John Grinder. They were still together. Then I got to train with all the people that split off. I mean, one of the things my dad was really big at, and I'm still at, is that, if you're not growing, you're rotting. So every year we got to go get, I know right now as we're speaking, there's probably somebody out there creating some wonderful new therapy or behavioral change technology that we won't hear about for 20 years because they got to prove it out or something. So I think that I always just want to be right there. What is new, what is different? And right now we need to tune up the brain in light, unfortunately, especially over the last year and a half, where they're telling people not to be outside, not to ground, stay in the home. We need to get the body back into that balanced state. And I believe what William Cousins said, he said that light is the most underprescribed nutrient on earth today. So that's kind of where we're at. And we're going to feed that light. When somebody says, why do you have the light in the eyes? I kind of just already said that, because when we activate the light in the eyes, we're actually activating 30% more of the neural networks in the brain. When you close your eyes, what we can show on things like the WAVI and others is the power of the brain actually goes down just by closing your eyes, because the brain's going, oh, it must be time for sleep. But then if we stimulate the cranial nerve 2, which is the part of the brain it's not the way we see, but it's basically saying, hey, what's going on over there? It's like when we were in the cave, we could see shadows and light, but we're activating different regions of the brain. And then what we said, what can we do with the ears? A lot of people always go, why do you have lights in the ears? That's just the most bizarre thing. And that has to do with frequency. Like we've talked about frequency already, but the there's two different groups of frequency research that we look at. One is called solfeggio. And what they know is there's certain harmonics that when our body is present to those, we have a physiological effect. Like we could play certain solfeggio music and we just start feeling good. We could play different music like what they call the Baroque classical time period. That music would actually make our brain work better. They call that the Mozart Effect. So as we tune our brain with this music, we thought, what if we did that also with light? Because every cell of our body, and this is something most people don't know about, but every cell of our body has something called chromophores. These are actually like, think of them like every cell has a battery, and that battery stores the energy that your body produces called ATP. And if we have enough ATP in that cell, it's like our batteries in our cell phones. They're not going to overcharge. They're going to pass that energy on to the next cell. Well, this comes in the form of light in our body. Now, of course, we get food when we eat food or drink water, we get energy from that. But the main form of energy in our system is light, sound, and vibration, and how we translate that at the cellular level. So when we're young, we have all this energy and our body is teeming with the production of ATP. There's not a lot of disharmony in the body, so we can get away with a lot more. But as we get better looking and more intelligent with age, certain things happen to our body, and we start. And the main thing we find in our activities as we get older, and this is one of the things that where we're at right now. So this is what I'm passionate about working with is dementia and traumatic brain injuries, because we're finding that the brain. We've done some case studies on people over 100 years old, and their brain was still able to improve. So the one study we just published last year in 2020 with the National Institute of Health showed a 39.8% improvement with women 55, 65. We had 100 people in the study. Now we have 500 people in that same study, and we're still getting about 38.5 to 38.9% improvement in their first session. Now that means the body has the potential to change, and then it takes, but I need to be very cautious here because it's not a permanent change. Nothing in the nervous system is permanent. I wish it was, but it's like going to the gym. If you work out, you're going to have physical strength. If you don't work your brain, you could have, we've seen a washout of 6 months where the training, if somebody was to do it for 6 weeks, we've seen 6 months afterwards, we've still had the same brain entrainment going on there. These are some of the things we're going to publish, because right now neurofeedback has no long-term studies that show any result outside of the actual practice. So it's kind of like what I'm saying about going to the gym. If we go to a personal trainer, we get strong and healthy. But if we get tired of paying him, $50 to $100, whatever we're paying, and we don't go to the gym, then our body is going to atrophy. The same is true with our mental state or our brain state, what they call neuroplasticity. So we're very interested in that. And we have some cool studies going on that maybe we can touch on with Alzheimer's.
Wonderful. So the device itself, the BrainTap, is a set of headphones with lights in the ears and a visor that drops down over the eyes and has lights in the eyes. Can you say a little bit about if there's a cautionary aspect for people that might have an adverse reaction to lights in the eyes or the flashing?
Yeah, I will say that our lawyers tell us to tell anybody who's had epilepsy to not use the visor lights. And although we've been very fortunate over the last 30 years, no epilepsy, no seizures have happened because of it. And we've had literally hundreds of thousands of people on it. But if you have photic epilepsy, which you'll know because if you're driving through the woods and the trees are going by and you get sick or nauseous, you probably don't want to use the visor lights. And one of the unique things about sound in the way that our algorithm works, we just finished a study, but now Valencia College down in Florida is taking it on and doing a 150-person study there. And then in Brazil, we have another 150 students who are going through this. But what we did is we took, so I just want to tell people sound works as well if you can't use the lights. But we took a 45-minute recording. The first 5 minutes was blank space, and we had them hooked up to heart rate variability. We had them hooked up to EEG. So we want to look at what are their brain and their heart doing. And for those wondering what heart rate's got to do with it, we have 4,000 neutrino cells in our heart, which means our heart has a brain. And that's the brain that actually controls the show. And you just have to look at, for anecdotal evidence, you just have to look at Monday mornings. There's more heart attacks on Monday morning than any other day of the week. When your heart's not in your job, not in your life, it disrupts everything. So that's why bringing that equanimity in. So as we go through the process here of working with the light, sound, and vibration, we're looking at each time training the brain to become more neuroplastic. I hope that answered your question. I don't know.
So the idea is that when I use the BrainTap device, the headphones and the visor, if I can use the visor as well, I'm increasing the energy that my brain and body have access to. I'm also changing the brain state from that tense, anxious, or confused state to something that's more relaxed and calm. How would you summarize the benefits of regular use of the BrainTap device?
Right. Yeah. Let me finish the one real quick, and I'll answer the question while I'm doing it. So in that 45-minute study, 5 minutes first was just HRV, EEG. We had them listen to just music. Now, when you listen to this Baroque classical music, we know there's so much science out there of how well it helps the brain to create neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, GABA production. This helps people to sleep better. So the long-term benefits are the same thing you would see with sound therapy, we would see with ours. But what we showed was when these people were on, and we only did 10 people in the pilot study, now it's the bigger study. When they did that, they downregulated their sympathetics. So their parasympathetics increased, which means now their rest, relax, digest, their thriving brain or their nervous system came online. At the end of that music, we were still recording for 5-minute washout. Their brain went right back to their original state. No change, no brain and fitness training. But we took that same music and we put our algorithm in the background, which is the isochronic tones, binaural beats, solfeggio frequencies, and Auger frequencies. And it's a blend of those. So it's not just like one frequency like you see on YouTube, which I can prove that doesn't work in the long term. It only works for 2 or 3 sessions, and the brain goes, wait a minute, I know that song. To really make changes, it's kind of like going to the gym. We got to do something different all the time. So we took that same music, we put our algorithm in the background, we dropped them down. Again, we saw the same response, except maybe a little bit deeper. It could have been because they had just listened to it. Now they want to relax a little bit more. Took them down into a deeper state of alpha and theta. And this was only 5 minutes. So it takes about 7 minutes to really get theta training to happen. So we drop them down, we show it. Now, what we found was at the end of that recording, at the end of that training, we kept recording even after the session was done. We just said, just lay there and breathe. It didn't go back to their normal state for 72 hours. So when we tested them, we had an effect on their nervous system that said, hey, we're going to upregulate how the brain works. And this is because just what you said, we're sending energy to the brain. Now, in the form of light, if you do just a little bit of research, the Dr. Hamlin from Harvard did the study on photobiomodulation in the brain. And the guy that wrote his chapter on photobiomodulation, I hired him. His name is Francisco Cedral. He's our science officer. And so he's helping because he has the research. You know, I know what I'm doing, but he has the actual clinical research. And he also has, he's on the board of 4 different neuro journals. So it's nice to have somebody who's checking your research to make sure everything's working. And what he said was, if this is true, then we can actually prove out brain fitness rather than, and we could do the same thing with neurofeedback, because I think neurofeedback is a good way to train the brain, but it's not I think what we've been doing, and this is what I do at Quantum University when I teach people using biofeedback or neurofeedback equipment, is once you're done stressing the brain, have them do a BrainTap session. Even counselors that we work with, once they're done doing the work, whatever that work is, could be EMDR, could be the rapid eye movement, could be the touching, where you're tapping, whatever it is, whatever you did to change that neurology. Hebb's law says that those neurons that fire together wire together, right? There's a 20-minute to 1 hour golden window when you make a neurological change to really get that exercising. So it has to do with the laws of learning as well. If you can use something within 5 minutes of hearing about it, your brain has a better chance of, remembering it. But if you can do it more than that, like you keep going over and over. So what we're doing is we're teaching the brain to go in and out of these different brain states to build behavioral flexibility on the nervous system level, not on the conscious level. It's more on probably a better way to say it is like on the subconscious level, because it's not about the conscious mind at this point. The conscious mind is about maybe some of the wording and things like that. But what we want to do is we want to show what happens. So what most people tell us, the first number one thing they feel with BrainTap is they sleep better. And this is because we get into what's called neurological lock, especially those who are in stress. They go to sleep stressed, they wake up clenching their teeth. Some people actually wake up in the fetal position and they don't even know why they're so upset or angry. I love the book, Emotions Buried Never Die, because they're still in their bodies. And I know when I researched you know a lot about that as well. So they're just festering in there. So we need to somehow liberate what I say is the energy. All stuck states have one thing in common. There's no breath, right? Anger, fear, frustration, anxiety. So we've got to get the energy moving again. So what most people tell us is they have a heightened degree of energy, but it's calm energy. It gives them, and I tell people we live in an energy economy. When you think about a lot of the negative foods we consume, a lot of the people are so scared about EMFs, everything that's going on, and they should be. I mean, there's a lot of things to be concerned with, but if you focus always on the negative, that's going to shut down the system. And we really focus on psychoimmunology, right? We focus on how does your psychology affect your immunity? And because your immunity starts with your gut, that's actually the second brain, right? So we have they kind of have them numbered wrong, in my opinion, but that's the way science does it. They say this is the first brain, the gut's the second brain, and the heart's the third brain. But really, the heart controls the show, and the gut is next. This brain is almost like a Google laptop. It doesn't even have any operating system, and it just goes to the cloud and gets the information and shares it with you. Consciousness, in my opinion, runs the show, but we don't know how to measure it. we can't figure out where it's at. It's like when somebody dies, we know they're not there, but we don't know on a conscious level where they're at.
So the benefits include, and you said one of the first things that people see as a benefit is improvement in sleep.
Yes.
And then what I'm imagining is, as we've seen, when we get people to shift from the habitual negative thoughts and the traumas, and you were talking about how when you started the relaxing, but you had all these negative tapes in your head from your dad, it didn't go so well. So we have to do something with that. Some would call it reprogramming or deprogramming. And there's a lot of that happens in your BrainTap protocols. You've got, well, I'll let you talk about how many different protocols.
We have over 1,000 sessions, but each protocol, actually, for those that are in therapy, they've been through NLP training, will see the person isn't learning to be a practitioner of NLP, but each of those techniques are in there. Like when they start with number one, we're teaching them first to disassociate, because if you identify with your problem, you amplify it. What you think about, you bring about. So we need to disassociate them. And I'm only going to do a couple of them so you can kind of get the idea. The second one is, I believe that everyone has all the resources they need to accomplish anything that needs to be done. They just don't have access to it when they need it. And this comes from something Buddha said over 5,000 years ago. He said, all unhappiness stems from unfavorable comparisons. So when you're living a life you don't like, and in your head there's a better life, but your stress level is so high you can't make that change. It's almost like being in a test and you studied all night long, but you get to the test and you can't remember that name or that answer. So the stress makes it worse for you, right? We know this. So all of this goes into doing that. So I think once somebody sleeps well, 2/3 of the American population isn't sleeping well. 1/3 has chronic insomnia problems. That's a big issue, right? And it's more to do with just the state of affairs, I think, right now. But this was even before anything going on in 2020. So there was something. 150 years ago, the average person slept 12 hours, and now the average person sleeps less than 6. So they did a study that I think is good to mention here with professional basketball players. They had them sleep just 1 hour longer than they were used to sleeping. Their free throw percentage went up 10%. Their shooting from the field went up 15%. And these are elite athletes. To get those kind of numbers so sleeping, I always tell people, sleep is when you incubate your superpowers for the next day. If you don't get to sleep, you just don't have the resources or the mental capacity to do the things. One of the studies showed that somebody who has poor sleep for 3 nights in a row is equivalent to drinking 3 alcoholic beverages. So, you would get, if you got pulled over for driving with 3 beers, let's say, you'd get a ticket, right? So this impairs our thinking and our judgment. And some people have chronic sleep problems. So that's number one. Number two is clarity and focus. What we found out in the Alzheimer's study was that the left hemisphere on these elderly women that we were reviewing was going slower, or the voltage in the frontal lobe on the left side was less than the voltage on the right side. Now, the problem with this is our brain synchronizes all information. So a lot of people think, well, I'm going to go back and get a memory. There's a filing cabinet back there with this holographic memory that I'm going to go get. That's not exactly how the brain works. You could activate up to 8 or more different regions of the brain for one memory. Now, if your right hemisphere and left hemisphere across the hippocampus has been compromised because of stress or anxiety, or maybe even damaged in an accident, or just from life, if our brain gets a signal even a millisecond late, the brain will stop it. Again, that has to do with Hebb's law. It says those neurons that don't fire together, they will unwire together. So that's why we lose our memories. And this is just a part of our nature. It's not to say that we shouldn't have great memories up until the day we die, because our ancient people they didn't give all the tribal information to the young. They gave it to the elders, so I think it's just a matter of how we maintenance our brain. And I think recovery is the biggest piece that people are missing in their life. They go. It's the American way. Do as much as you can, as fast as you can, get the biggest payout you can. And then, how many people, they say the average person doesn't live 5 years past retirement. They retire and expire because they haven't prepared for a life worth living. They've only had a life that they had to live. And it's a big difference.
Help me with the follow through on recover. What do you mean by recover?
So what we did is we've a couple of the different studies we did these with professional athletes. We have there's a group in Kansas City Sport, which is they put in a big healing and recovery center for professional athletes. So we wanted to show them what would happen after a workout if they started doing BrainTap after they worked out, because this is a way these guys work really hard. They're on their feet. So we did an HRV. We have our own professional version. We measure 9 different parameters, and we showed them what their energy level was before the practice. After the practice, we showed them how much energy depletion. This is normal. I mean, you're going to use up the energy. But when they went in, they have a 20 station room now where there's 20 brain taps set up, and they have these lymphatic drainage boots because they got to get the bad blood out too. So I said, well, while they're doing that, let's just put the headset on and see if we can get a change in recovery. We found out that we could reclaim up to 80% of the energy they had before practice, and it only took 20 minutes. And they didn't eat anything. Of course, they drank whatever they drink to stay hydrated, but they didn't eat any food. There was no stimulant. So we said, wow, if that works for professionals, what could we do for the average person? And we're finding that some people actually at 2 o'clock every day, we need to recover. These bodies that we all have, they're all genetically, we're all from the Serengeti. And what do all the animals do around 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the Serengeti? We all take naps. But we do is we go get coffee, tea, or sweets or something to keep our biology going. And so what we showed was, instead of doing that, you could upregulate using your electrical system, which is turning off the sympathetic system, turning on the parasympathetic. But too many people use their neurohormonal for that. That's when you use coffee and tea and chocolate. So what we're showing is the recovery after a workout. Or one of the biggest groups we work with too is chiropractors, because the chiropractor will really work the neurology when they're doing the adjustments. And then that 20-minute window after the adjustment, we showed a 19% improvement in neurological function, even after a chiropractic adjustment. So that's the recovery talking about too. The body needs to downregulate. They call it a recovery score, right? In neurofeedback, there's a way with the WAVI we can test. If we stress out your system, how quickly can you recover? And as we get older, this is one of the things that happens, right? Somebody gets upset in the morning, they're still upset in the evening, maybe even 2 days later. It's because their brain can't reorganize around that one negative event. And that could be from PTSD or some other thing is triggering that. But what we find is that if we can unlock the nervous system, because you get in that the beta lock is when you're so frustrated, you're so upset, you're so angry, you can't breathe, right? We've all seen this with little kids or my grandkids. I know that didn't take me long to stop telling them to breathe because they get angrier, right? But if you just kind of pace them and get them to relax,
right,
they got to get out of that. The body just gets locked in the best way. So that's where the light, sound, and vibration comes in. The brain goes, hey, what's that light doing? What's that sound doing? What's going? And so it's doing this. That's why we call it brain fitness, because the brain is actually doing a little exercise, and it has nothing to do with conscious thinking. It has to do with your physiology. And then while you're in that state, of course, when you're in the state of alpha and theta, you're in a state of hypernesia. Very similar to something like if somebody were to say about like hypnosis or something like that in that physiological state. But the reality is that now you're in a chemical wash of your own best, like acetylcholine. When I was talking about alpha, if you're sitting next to the ocean, for instance, that ocean would resonate at 10 hertz frequency. Your body then matches that. You start to create acetylcholine. You start to feel good, and people start going, I love the ocean. Well, do they love the ocean because of the ocean, or do they love the ocean because of the chemical reaction they get in their body? So, all of these things play into it. That's why even when we're doing things we did some studies with PTSD and psilocybin, which I don't know the experiences of, right? Because I personally have never done that. But the doctors in Dallas that were Rosenthal put together the study, we had some of the soldiers did not want to take a psilocybin because they had addictions. So I said, well, let's do some brain scans while the people that want to do a psilocybin, what their brain's doing. What we found was they had high degree of gamma activity. And when you have a high degree of gamma activity, which is a very new brainwave really for what we're talking about, like Lou Tai at MIT showed that she could get a 6% increase in gamma with her blue light therapy in a room that cost $10 million. And we showed her how we get 21% more gamma with a little headset that costs $640. And she goes, wow, how did you do that? We didn't intend on that. It just happened. But what we did was we mirrored that gamma activity that the psilocybin was getting, and people were getting a psilocybin trips without a psilocybin because our brain has the receptors for those, just like cannabis. If people, we have these, or opioids, for instance. That's why we could work with helping people through painless surgeries and things of that nature that can't use anesthetic, because the brain actually creates that response anyway.
Right. Wonderful. Well, and you made a statement earlier about the brain being such a fabulous pharmacy, right? And basically the original pharmacy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what you're talking about here is activating that even without having to ingest plants or, tree bark or, eat a specific insect. And we've known for, lots and lots of years that when we help people shift the focus of their thoughts and move them into that more relaxed state, all kinds of good stuff can happen. And some of the places where it doesn't happen are because that energy you're talking about has gotten locked down because of trauma and whatever someone perceives as trauma. So this is a wonderful tool and set of tools that you have. Let's imagine that we're running close to the end of the interview and there's something you want to make sure you get in we haven't even asked you about yet. What is another aspect of this work with the BrainTap, or something else that you want to share with us?
Yeah, the biggest thing I think that I would like to share is that the brain is neuroplastic. Most people know that now. They've heard that the brain can change. That used to not be the case 15 years ago, right? So, but we also know that you have to change it up. So if you start researching brainwave entrainment, which is what we do, really, we're using each one of these, whether you use light to do it, and there's a lot of different techniques with light. It doesn't have to be BrainTap. There's a lot of ways that light does it. You can do it with eyes open or eyes closed. Of course, it's a pleasant experience with the eyes closed. But know that each time you do something different, we need to challenge. We only learn when we're outside of our comfort zone, not inside of it. If you go to the gym and only do things that are easy for you to lift, you're not going to stimulate any muscle growth. The same is true with your brain. And I'm not against, brain games and things like that. I think they're good. But after you do them, you need some kind of recovery. So if it's not this, one of the things that I usually teach people, it's a very simple breath. It's the 4-8 breath, where you breathe into the mental count of 4, breathe out to the mental count of 8. And this is an exercise for your nervous system, because when you breathe in, you're actually triggering the sympathetic system. So it might bring about this is just kind of a caution for people. It might bring up some stuff because emotional memories are dependent upon emotional charge a lot of most of the time. So they're going to bring it up based on your emotional state. So you just breathe in slowly to the 4. You don't have to get a really bad experience or anything like that. But as soon as you start to feel, maybe you might feel a little anxious, because when you see somebody who's anxious, they're breathing really high, right? So then you breathe out really slow to the mental count of 8. And if you can practice that before you go to bed, you'll see that you're sleeping, even without the BrainTap, your sleeping will improve, because just that breathing technique alone, we were just published in PubMed.
Yeah.
And I was very surprised. We had 2 papers published by PubMed this spring, and they were both on breathing techniques, because we work with Bhopal, India, with AIMS Institute. And what we wanted to show them was, if we can use sound, this was just sound, so it wasn't anything to do with our light, but it was our algorithm for sound with some Kriya breathings, which is a breathing technique very similar to what I'm just doing here, but they speed it up over time. And they were able to show that people that have never meditated, as long as they had that algorithm, they could get more and more of this alpha activity. The key first is to start developing the alpha. And the reason for that is, when the more stress we get, the more we start to lose a brainwave between alpha and beta. It's called SMR. And that sensory motor rhythm has to do with balance. So what I really would like to say to the people who, especially if you're listening because you want to improve your brain's function, maybe because you're scared of dementia or Alzheimer's, as long as you exercise your brain, the old saying, use it or lose it, is very true. And so having conversations, doing different things, using those neuro pathways, and light, sound, and vibrations, an easy way to do it. But there are other ways if you need to do it. So it's not, I want people to know this isn't the only way to do that. There are other ways. We just try to find an easy way that you just press an app and click the button. And I don't know if they shared with you the link, or if you have a link you can share with them, but we do have they can try our stuff out for free. And we do have a freemium model. So if they can't afford it, they can just use it for free and de-stress. We do this at Duke University. We've created a program for the students called Healthy Duke. And if they have any issues on campus, the counselors tell them, hey, go listen to this session on the BrainTap app. And they have a little bundle there that teaches them how to de-stress.
Wonderful. And then, of course, what you're sharing is that people can get some benefits for themselves, even just practicing that kind of breathing before they go to sleep at night. And I recommend people do that multiple times throughout the day, just to do what you're calling recovery, right?
Yes.
Give it a little rest and recharge period. And the more people do that and drop themselves out of those higher stress levels, the better results they get in all kinds of areas in their life.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize, they go, I can't believe Jim died of a heart attack. He never got upset. Well, he should have got upset because our body, it's not about getting upset at someone or doing some kind of some way to raise our heart rate, some way to slow down our heart rate. We need to have both of those things. But if most of Americans are just pushing the limits of their stress all the time, and there's no recovery, like they go until they drop. And I think it's unfortunate that we have 250 channels on our television, because there's always something to entice the creativity or the imagination, and people just sit there and zone out.
Yeah, and not in the way that would facilitate this kind of recovery that you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's a delight, and I'm going to keep using the BrainTap and see where we go from there. And I'm grateful that you're mentioning that there's that free trial for people. And you mentioned a couple books. Can you tell us the primary books that you've written that you would recommend people learn more about this?
Yeah, the one, when you share the free link that will help you get or whatever, they'll get a copy of Thrive and Overdrive for free. They can keep that book whether they do anything at all. That's my latest book. It's a real book. It's not a web book. But you have to read it on your Kindle browser or something like that. It's there for you. And the next book I would say is Awaken the Genius, which is my first book. There's 9 books in between there, but the Awaken the Genius was about accelerated learning. But I go over how the brain, that information really hasn't changed. I wrote that book in '94, and it was the best self-help book of the year that year. But it's still very relevant today for people that, especially if you have children or you want to improve your learning skills, because it's all about accelerated learning and how our brain works and some techniques. And Those are probably the two books I would recommend. But if somebody's a therapist out there and they want to know what's the background information behind these sessions, I wrote the book, Discover the Language of the Mind. And that's my summary of the 13 core techniques that I use in BrainTap. That book has but it's for a therapist though. So if you're not a therapist, you probably wouldn't get as much out of that book.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. I greatly appreciate it. And I'll look forward to your next discoveries.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Take care. Patrick K. Porter, PhD, is an award-winning author, speaker, and the founder of BrainTap, the leader in technology-enhanced meditation. Dr. Porter pioneered the use of brainwave entrainment to improve clarity, sleep, and energy, and remains at the forefront of scientific research. Dr. Porter founded BrainTap with the goal of making this technology accessible to everyone. BrainTap offers over 1,000 original audio sessions in 12 languages and serves a worldwide user base with its mobile app and headset. Dr. Porter has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, People, Entrepreneur, Inc., and on ABC, NBC, CBS as an expert in brain health and wellness. And in 2020, Dr. Porter received the IAFNR Lifetime Achievement Award. Please visit www.braintap.com.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.